states, we have the battlegrounds of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona. All three of these states flipped from Trump in 2016 to Biden in 2020. But the most surprising of these was Arizona, since it has been one of the most reliably Republican states over the last 50 or so years. In 2020, Arizona went to Biden by a margin of plus 0.31. Wisconsin voted for him by a margin of plus 0.63, and Michigan voted for him by a margin of plus 2.8. But this election, these three states are pretty split. The most recent poll in Michigan shows Harris ahead by a margin of plus 1. If any of these three Rust Belt states is most likely to vote for Harris, it would be Michigan, given its margin in the last election. Moving on to the states that end their voting at 10 p.m. EST, we have Iowa, Montana, Utah, and the battleground state of Nevada. Montana and Utah can be made solid red, since their latest poll shows Trump ahead by margins of plus 15 and plus 32, respectively. Iowa can be made a likely Republican state, even though the last poll shows a margin of only plus 4. Overall, polls here have heavily favored Trump, with the poll before this one showing him ahead by a margin of plus 12. And then the one before that, plus 18. And I think if Ohio is polling in a likely margin, given how close these two states have been politically over the last 8 years, I think Iowa will be too. And in Nevada, the most recent poll shows both candidates in another tie with 49% each. I would make this a toss-up state, but just like with some of our other battleground states, polls in the last election had the margin of error in the last election was almost 3 percentage points off, underestimating Trump. So because of this, I'm going to make Nevada another tilt Trump state. The group of states that close voting at 8 p.m. EST is our largest group, representing a staggering amount of votes. Out of these states, Trump can expect to win Alabama with plus 20, Mississippi with plus 18, Tennessee with plus 26, Missouri with plus 12, and Oklahoma with plus 16, making all these solid red. Meanwhile, Harris is guaranteed Maine's 1st district with plus 26, Massachusetts with plus 31, Rhode Island with plus 20, Connecticut with plus 17, Maryland with plus 31, and D.C., even though it doesn't have any polls from this cycle. Also usually included in this list are New Jersey and Delaware, but polls have shown margins too close recently to make them solid blue. Florida seems to have been getting closer and closer as we get closer to November, but polls have been very wrong in the past, especially in the Sunshine State, since it used to be one of the most heated battleground states. Florida's most recent poll shows Trump ahead plus 6, even though the current average shows Trump only ahead plus 4.2. But again, based on how it's voted historically and its previous polling errors, I expect these numbers to be underestimating Trump, making Florida a likely Republican state. So because of this, I'm going to make Nevada another tilt Trump state. Next up, we have Idaho, Washington, Oregon, and California, which all close their polls at 11 p.m. EST. Idaho can go for Trump in a safe margin, with its last poll showing a margin of plus 28. Washington and California can be made solid blue, with their last polls showing plus 21 and plus 25, respectively. And Oregon is going to be a likely Democrat state, even though its last poll shows a Harris margin of plus 5. In 2020, Biden won Oregon by a margin of plus 16.1, and a double-digit shift in either candidate's favor for any state is highly unlikely. And in Pennsylvania, which could very well be the most important state of this entire election, this is not only because it represents the most votes out of any of the other battlegrounds, but it is also the closest in the highly contested Rust Belt region. The most recent poll shows both candidates at a tie, and the one before that is also a tie, which just shows how close it really is. Polls here overall have been very split, but when you take into account the 3.5-point error from 2020, I think it'll end up going to Trump in the tilt margin. The last poll in New Jersey from a few months ago between Trump and Biden shows Trump pulling ahead with plus 1, which I think is a crazy poll, since in 2020 it voted for Biden by a margin of plus 15.9. And in Delaware, the latest poll shows Biden winning by a margin of plus 11. And even though this is an old poll too, it's still notable. So we are going to make both of these states likely Democrat rather than safe. Maine at large is also going to go to Harris in a likely margin, since the last poll shows her winning with a margin of plus 9. And I'm also going to give her Illinois by a likely margin, since polls here overall have been a lot closer than in past elections, even though the latest one shows her winning with plus 16. Looking first at each candidate's safe states, Trump is sure to win South Carolina with plus 14, Kentucky with plus 28, Indiana with plus 17. Out of these last three states in this group, Harris can only depend on Vermont to vote for her in a safe margin, especially since it's widely considered to be the most Democratic state in the nation. The most recent poll here shows this since it gives Harris the win with a margin of plus 41, and the poll before that shows her winning with plus 40. Virginia in this election has been a lot closer than most expected since Biden had almost doubled Clinton's margin in 2020 from plus 5.3 to plus 10.1. Like in many states this election, Trump has seen a massive boost in polls and overall popularity. The most recent poll shows Harris winning with plus 10, and it seems like she has steadily been recovering from how close it got when Biden was still in the race. But just a month ago, she was polling with margins of plus 3, and in July, polls between Trump and Harris showed Republicans leading with plus 4 and plus 1. Even though it looks like Harris has been making a comeback here, I think it'll end up being closer to what we saw in 2016, and I'd personally be shocked if she performs better in Virginia than Biden did in the last election. And in our first battleground state, Georgia, which was the closest state of the entire 2020 election, polls have been neck and neck. Looking at the most recent average, currently Trump leads by a margin of plus 1, with most polls giving him high tilt or low lean margins. The last poll shows Trump ahead by a margin of plus 2, and the two before that shows him winning with another plus 2, and then an even bigger plus 3. Given how much the former president is doing across the country, it'd be very surprising if we see a margin as close as the plus 0.24 we saw in the last election. And honestly, I think polls are slightly underestimating Trump, so I'm going to lean it rather than tilt it in his favor. It's been over a week since the debate, and Trump is surging in the most recent polls. Today, we're going to be looking at my prediction for the 2024 election based on the most recent polls in all 50 states, and to show you what you can actually expect to see on election day. I'll be filling in the map in order based on when their voting ends.